السلام عليكم. أنا ربيت في أبو ظبي. I grew up in Abu Dhabi, an island, and I heard a lot of stories from the elders, from my parents, from my mother, from my father, from my grandpa, about how the sea shaped us, how the sea shaped Abu Dhabi, the UAE, and how our forefathers lived off the sea. And I'll share an idea with you guys. خبروني شو رأيكم. Tell me what you think about it. Our elders lived off the sea, and it's the reason we're here today. Isn't it right for us to be taking care of the sea? To be conserving the sea? Not just for conservation, but to stay Emirati. Because once upon a time, the sea was all they had. It was their main source of protein. It was their main source of food. It was their main source of trade. It was their main source of money, way before the oil. It was food security. Something as simple as malih. That's just salted fish. It sustained livelihoods. It was food security. Families salted and dried this fish and traded it for survival. They didn't have refrigerators, and this is the only way they could conserve it. Yes, we had camels, but they were for transport. They were not for meat. They were for milk. They were a sign of status. So they were not for food. Studies have shown that Bedouin diets used or had meat in special occasions only, but their daily protein came from fish and dairy. And this just shows you how resilient they were. And this history roots conservation in its culture. We do not protect nature as a luxury. We protect nature to protect who we are as Emiratis. Growing up in Abu Dhabi, I witnessed changed. I witnessed a lot of change, and anyone from my generation and older would have seen the changes. And that's why I chose to dive deep into natural sciences, to understand the world that I loved, where I found beauty, but I also found loss. The changes are not abstract, and each one of us is living them every day. And each one of us here has seen the changes. What was ordinary once upon a time, in my dad's time, in my grandpa's time, is today very rare. I've heard stories of my grandfather fighting off a hammerhead shark 5 minutes away from here, in an island called Halat al-Bahrani. I'm 39 years old, and I've only encountered one hammerhead in my life after 2 years of intensive search, hours out at sea. This was not the norm back in the 60s and the 70s. As a child, I swam across what felt like endless corals, and I thought, this is the way it will always be. This is what our seas will always look like. We used to go fishing with my father and fishing with my uncle, and every trip was full of life. It would take us 5 to 10 minutes to have our catch for lunch and head back to Abu Dhabi. We'd always encounter dolphins, we'd encounter dugongs, we'd encounter turtles. Today, that same spot that would give us fish in 5 minutes, fishing there is impossible. We can stay there for hours and will not find anything. And to me, this is scary, because the new generation is seeing this and thinking that this is the norm. The baseline is shifting, and the shift is really scary, because what happens is expectations are lowered, targets are lowered. People set targets for what they see today because they don't know what was yesterday. And this is something we call in science shifting baseline syndrome. And this is, to me, is very scary, especially in the world of conservation. Across the world, and this is not just local, this is across the world, coastal development is squeezing intertidal areas. And shallow waters are becoming fragmented shorelines. In water construction, dredging, suspended materials, these all affect the habitats that sustain the life that our forefathers lived off. These disturbances shift communities, change structure of communities, and also disturb their movement. We think of an infrastructure and its effects on the environment is fixed to that infrastructure or that footprint of the infrastructure. While in reality, the effect of that infrastructure is way wider because that effect affects the water flow. It affects the movement of the currents. It affects the way the animals move. It leads to fragmentation of habitats. Sometimes species cannot go back into their habitats or cannot leave their habitats. Sometimes that leads to local extinction. And we've seen that globally, for example, with the, I think it's the green or the great sawfish, who was pushed out of its habitat because of coastal constructions. And what's even more scarier is that all the development is happening on the shallower waters. The same shallow waters that hold most of the habitats and the fish and the wildlife. I don't know if you know this, but corals sustain somewhere around 25% of all marine habitats, marine species. That's through their life stages. But these corals only cover less than 1% of the whole Earth. So let that sink in. 1%. That's where most of the development is happening. What's scary is these habitats are not just facing coastal development, they are also facing climate change. So just add climate change and the coastal development, recovery for these habitats become very slow. I don't want it to all be gloom and doom. Abu Dhabi's corals are resilient. Abu Dhabi's shallow reef, safe seagrass beds, and our mangroves have survived thresholds that most habitats around the world cannot survive. Our corals are pushing through waters that reach over 35%, 35 degrees Celsius. If there's any biologist in the room, you would know that 35 degrees Celsius is lethal for corals. Yet our corals are able to survive these waters and these temperatures. And that's because many of our corals host a heat-tolerant partner. All corals have an algae-like, I don't want to get into biology, but it's a very interesting fact that corals have an algae-like animal that lives within them. And these are the secrets behind the corals being able to survive at high heats. This being said, Abu Dhabi today, currently, is a living lab for climate change for the world. The whole world can come and look at how Abu Dhabi is coping with climate change, with coastal development. We're giving the world a blueprint and a real pathway for action, protection of resilient habitats, and monitoring long-term change for them to know how to protect and restore at scale. And I said protect first, because protection is key. We need to protect what we have and what's functioning properly before we restore it. Because these natural functioning habitats are irreplaceable, no matter what we do. But when we go into restoration, we need to make sure that our restoration is correct. We need to choose the correct sites for the corals, the correct water movement. We need to make sure that for seagrasses, we choose the right stable bottoms and clear waters. For mangroves, we need to make sure that we're We're planting the mangroves at the right elevations and the right water flows. We need to match restoration projects to the correct sites and monitor the results. We need to restore where we know nature can recover. We need to steer away from habitat conversion. For example, don't plant mangroves in a place where we know fish feed. So there's no competition. Restoration is a science. It's not guesswork. And I know that there's a lot of programs put in place for conservation, for restoration. But I also know that things will never return how they used to be back in the 90s. Sensitive corals like Acropora might never come back because the consistent heat waves wipes them out quickly. But we still have resilient corals in Abu Dhabi. We have coral known as Platygyra and Porites, and both these species have been pushing through these high heats. Not everything is lost. Like I said, coral reefs still live in Abu Dhabi. Our mangroves still can expand, and we've seen natural rejuvenation in our mangroves. Our seagrass meadows are still feeding over 3,000 dugongs and support fishery. People still care. And there are many, and I know many in this room, are acting towards this conservation. But every single one of us in this room can act, connecting people to the place and linking heritage to nature. We can all conserve what we have. If you go fishing, follow the seasons, follow the sizes, avoid the months where key species spawn, give them time to replenish. And of course, goes without saying, avoid all endangered species. If you enjoy spending time at the coast, leave no trace. We know that litter never dissolves, and we know that litter affects the lives of turtles, dolphins, dugongs, and even seabirds. If you own land near the coast, keep a buffer. Let nature does what it does best. I know it's tempting to build hard walls to protect your land, but hard walls might solve one problem and create many more. If you're a teacher, if you're a parent, take your children to the water. Show them the seagrass. Let them play in the mud. Let them play around the mangroves. Let them see the small fish. Let them see the crabs feed. Curiosity that we put in our kids makes them care. And if you're a developer, measure your impact on the sea. Reduce your impact on the sea. Plan around habitats. Don't build on top of them. And why it matters today, and why should we keep speaking up today. Abu Dhabi was built on the knowledge of winds and tides and fish. The knowledge lives within the stories we have heard from our parents and our grandparents. Today, the sea is warmer. Coastal development is intensified. The population is growing all around the world. And I grew up hearing that the sea was generous. It gave us pearls. It gave us fish. It gave us a nation. And today, these seas need our help. I'll say it again. Choose fish from healthy stocks. Support sustainable development. Build around nature. Build with nature. Support restoration projects. Support monitoring projects. Teach the children the skills and the stories that kept our families alive. Culture is practice. And I'll leave you with this. I started with an idea, and I'll wrap up with this idea. If the sea built us, let us build it back to health. When the next generation looks across Abu Dhabi waters, let them see what we saw growing up. Let them see living reefs. Let them see moving seagrasses. Let them see dugongs. Let them see hammerheads. Let them see turtles. Let them see a future that looks like home to all of us. Thank you.